And so they knew kind of what was happening, but I don't think they really thought anyone would come to the restaurant besides their parents. And so building up to it, they were just like, okay, this is cool, and like we're prepping, but like we're gonna only sign up for one shift because it doesn't matter. And the first day we get there, we're setting everything up, and the restaurant's supposed to open at 11, and there's like 3 people waiting out at 10:30. Like, are you guys open? Like, can we order something? And they're like, okay, like we can start making stuff now. And like as they start making stuff, there's like a line that builds up, and one of my students like nudges the other student, and she's like, hey, like look at all these people, like we're a success.
Melanie, thanks so much for taking the time to sit down with us and chat. I guess let's start with this. What is the Food Computer Program?
Yes, so the Food Computer Program is a program that started in Baltimore City Public Schools where we build food computers. So food computer is essentially like a tabletop greenhouse that's inside of this box that's climate controlled with computer programming and robotics. And it's a hydroponic system, so we're growing plants with water and not soil. And essentially we're using like a Raspberry Pi to connect to a temperature sensor, grow lights, and a fan to kind of control the temperature inside so that we can grow plants in these systems.
There's a lot of talk about vertical farming, and so this idea that we can, build up rather than out because we've got people that are essentially living on top of each other. Are we going to see greater acceptance of that with the next generation?
Yeah, I think so. So I think one of the really cool things about the Food Computer Program, and so it's a class that we build on like physical computing principles, computer programming in Python, plant science, urban agriculture, engineering, human-centered design, like all these components, and then say, okay, now you've learned all these things in your academics, like how do you apply this to a project, and then how do you apply that to real life? And so I think one of the things, especially as we see like technology infused into like everything that we're doing, is that like it's becoming more acceptable to say like what we're doing now has worked until now, but maybe we need more solutions for the future, right? And so if we're saying we've done all these large plots of wheat and barley and all this stuff, but now we have more people living in cities. We need more transportation getting people to different places. We have pockets of places that don't have grocery stores. Like, how do we change the way that we're growing food and the way that we're consuming food to like supplement that? So I think it seems weird. Maybe we're like in a transition state right now that's like, okay, we need to move from this thing to something new. And we're trying out a bunch of things like food computers, like different vertical farming, which in towers or pallets or aquaponics, and trying to figure out like, how do we even make one of these a sustainable solution? So I think we're kind of growing into that, but maybe it's not like totally mainstream right now.
One of the things that's exciting to me about open source, about Linux, and about open hardware is the fact that there is a sense of empowerment, right? When you have a Raspberry Pi, for example, what you're talking about, there is no gatekeeper. Anybody can afford a $35 computer. Well, for the most part, in this country, anybody can afford a $35 computer. And that gives a sense of empowerment, and it removes the gatekeeper from technology. What can we do as technologists to help further that empowerment?
Yeah, so I think, and one of the things that I've seen in my classes is that students like love doing this hands-on tech stuff, and the open source makes that even more accessible. So if we're saying, okay, you've done this thing with the Raspberry Pi, you kind of understand how it works. If you really like this, you can find any community online. You can find a community, probably people who live in Baltimore who are just doing this as a hobby to like help you out. Like there's so much support around that if you just like have one kernel of interest, right? And so I think one of the cool things about including this in education is saying, okay, we need to involve technology in different aspects of education, just because like we're growing into all these things that require technology and haven't really had that support growing into it. And so one of the cool things about open source is that if we need to educate educators to say you need to include this in your curriculum, or if we need to say we need more teachers in computer science, having like an open source project where there might be developers or people who are hobbyists who've done these projects who can come in and say, I'll help you out with this because I already know how this works. Or maybe not a full-time teacher, but having that community of technology and apply it to different projects and apply it to education and apply it to potentially like city civic challenges that like the general public could benefit from. So I think having this open source community in general is like great for moving anything forward.
Absolutely it is. Yeah. There's an interesting book. It's called Program or Be Programmed, 10 Commandments for a Digital Age by Douglas Rushkoff. He touches on this concept that we don't learn to control the technology tools that we have at our disposal, and because of that, we in turn become controlled by them. How do we help inspire students to look at technology as something as a tool that they can use to create something else, rather than just walking into Best Buy and saying, what can I spend some money on and take home and play with? Buy like a Raspberry Pi, something that I can use to create something else.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I started the food computer program, is because in school I had done a bunch of business plan competitions, and like maybe 50 to 75% of all the pitches were something like, we've made an app for this, we've made a website for this, we've made drones to do this thing, and it wasn't really getting at like actually solving the problem. They're just saying, here's a tech that I know of, people think it's cool, and like you can create something for it because I've learned this in my class. And so I think incorporating the technology into stuff and applying it to real projects is something that is like totally necessary, right? And so so I think in incorporating things like Raspberry Pi and like these really hands-on projects that are more than just how do you turn on an LED light, or how do you use a relay to control something on and off, like those are really good, and you need foundations in computer science and biology and chemistry and stuff to do stuff, but you also need to understand like how that applies to real life. So projects, open source projects like food computers are, I'd say, like one of the ideal things to incorporate in a classroom, because you say, you've learned this thing, here's a real project that you can create. Like you've learned how to control an LED light with this like simple code connected to GPIO pins. Then you say, okay, this is cool for a tiny light, but like, what does that do for you? How about we connect this to this box farm, and you can help plants grow by attaching this grow light to it. So kind of by like infusing these different projects, just like having that in the back of students' minds and say, okay, like I can apply, like helping them bridge that connection to like what they do in their classes to real life. And then so hopefully they can go on in the future and say, oh yeah, I remember when I had to take this and then we did this thing. How about now I take this and do the other thing? You know, like try and make small connections throughout the class or throughout their like time in school, so that later on when they're trying to problem solve themselves, they still have that connection and can relate it to something they've done with technology or open source in general.
The mainstream media puts a lot of emphasis on limiting screen time, right? Mm-hmm. And we hear that all the time. We need to limit screen time, and we want kids to get outside and play. We don't want them playing on their technology, right? And so how do we limit that? And not to say that that is an invalid concern, because obviously we want kids to get exercise and get out and play and all of those kinds of things. But Charlie Resinger is a technology director for Penn Manor School District in Pennsylvania. And one of the things that he embarked on was this idea to get a one-to-one laptop program. So every child has a direct interaction with a laptop, and obviously he's using open source and open hardware to make that happen. What can we do as technologists to promote a stronger emphasis on technology? Not necessarily for games or to take away from outdoor activities, but I think it's an important part of our future. How do we promote that in a responsible way?
Yeah, and so that's another thing that we kind of do in the food computer program. So we spend time with the basics, we spend time doing food computer, and then we say, what does this mean for you guys? You as high school students who've lived in Baltimore City for the past 17 years, who know all this stuff, like what can you do with this stuff outside of your life? And so I think the solution to saying, let's limit screen time, but still keep in line with like, how do we improve technology and keep people interested in technology and keep on developing new technology, is saying, okay, how do we use technology to supplement the other stuff that's going on in our communities? How do we say, okay, we know Baltimore City has a lot of food deserts or like healthy food priority areas, which means like people don't have grocery stores within a certain distance from their house, or they don't have like easy transport to grocery stores. So like that obviously causes a lot of problems, right? Like health problems, day-to-day problems and stuff like that. So if we say, we know that a solution is not for every single person to have a food computer in their house, but if you know about this, how can you apply like food computer principles, I guess, to solving community challenges? And like you as high school students, and then how can you broaden that to the larger community and say, we know this local software firm likes to do tech stuff, and we know this Urban Farmers Alliance does farming stuff, and we know that you guys are trying to do stuff in the community. So how do we get like all these different groups of people talking together and like having this like tech literacy understanding and then solving other problems on top of that? I think that's kind of the solution of, instead of saying we need more people to do tech stuff, or we need people to go totally opposite and like don't use any screens, right? And I think that those are two extremes, and neither extreme is the solution, right?
Balance.
Yeah, and so I think kind of like understanding how you can supplement the technology to the actual problems is kind of like how we can not only like limit the screen time and limit the bad things that are happening because of increasing technology, but also like bringing people together. Because I think that's another thing, that when people spend time on their phone, you're not paying attention to the person in front of you, or you're not paying attention to like things around you. So in order to kind of like bridge that gap, saying you're using technology together to solve this greater problem that could be potentially solved without technology, but could be sped up by using the technology and screens and stuff like that.
I think it was an Einstein quote that we can't solve problems with the exact same thinking as we used to create them, right? And so in the United States, we have a set education model. We have grid seating. The teacher stands at the front of the classroom. She projects in, by speaking to the students, and then they are expected to take in. And we know every bit of empirical evidence that we have says that kids learn differently. All people learn differently. And technology can be a part of that, because a student can experience something on a hands-on way. They can experience something by listening. They can experience something by reading or by seeing. We can accommodate those different styles of learning. What can technologists do to help update the education model that we use here in the United States?
Yeah, that's like 100%. I totally agree with all that stuff, especially as we need people to fill in these jobs, and we need to build pipelines into places that don't traditionally have technology and like need to have people who are experts in technology to do stuff. One of the things that I've been trying to pilot in the food computer program is saying, okay, we know that not everyone is going to be a teacher. Like not every teacher can learn computer science to like teach something like this, and not everyone who goes into the computer science or programming path is going to stop their job and go back and being a teacher. But how can we like merge those two together and like have a partnership between maybe local tech firms, or even like larger tech firms, and school districts or individual schools? So one of the things that I see as a success, as a way to incorporate technology successfully and have and not try to like overburden any one party, is to say, okay, we have the traditional teacher and say a biology class, and say he or she knows how to manage the classroom, how to talk about certain concepts with the students, but maybe they don't know about computer programming and how it can be applied to like something that they're doing. So then you bring in a partner from local tech firm and say, we're going to do some Raspberry Pi stuff, and it's related to biology. And so you have those two kind of playing off of each other, saying like, this is what I know about technology, this is how it's applied to biology, and have those two kind of merge together. And you can kind of do this with any subject, right? You can do this even with like history, and talk about like, here's the history of, I don't know, how motors came to be, and then play around with motors and stuff like that. And so I think kind of making it more of like a community team instead of like a one-person approach to solving a problem, which then also benefits the students to say, okay, now I know what this person does in their job and this person does in their job, and they both know about technology, but they both do totally different things. Or like, this man in this job and this woman in this job is something that I never thought of to like think of as a career. And so I think kind of involving more people in that way, and having the school systems be open to having that type of collaboration and problem solving in the class as more than like a one-off thing. It's nice to have someone come and talk to the class about their career, but if it's a one-time thing, it's easy to forget about, or it's easy to like doze off and like not really remember. But if you have that consistent like once a week or twice a week kind of person coming into the classroom and engaging with the class and engaging with the teacher and having these like fun activities, you're like learning about the actual concept that you're supposed to learn about, but you're also learning about more the world around you and how you can have an impact on it.
We forget sometimes, I think, as technologists or as developers or system administrators, that the work that we do has real impact, right? And it actually does touch lives. Do you have any examples of real world impacts from students?
Yeah, I mean, so I think like almost every day there's something that some student will say like, oh wow, that's cool, or like, or they'll say something and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe you made that connection without like me even like leading into that. I think one of the most recent examples, so my students had run a pop-up restaurant at a local food hall in Baltimore City. And they basically took over this pop-up stall for the entire weekend, and they made a build your own panini restaurant. And then they used yeah, it was really fun. And they took so we had a bunch of food computers and like a food computer room it's like a room-scaled food computer in the basement of our school, and they grew basil, kale, cilantro, and parsley, and then we used that to make sauces for the panini sandwiches. So it was like super fun, and like building up to it, we had to do a lot of prep, and we had to be like, how do we think about marketing? How do we think about prepping for food? How do we think about the recipes and standardizing and menus? And I think like throughout the process, the students were kind of like, we had gone a field trip to the food hall and they had seen it, and it's like a really cool, trendy place. And so they knew kind of what was happening, but I don't think they really thought anyone would come to the restaurant besides their parents. And so building up to it, they were just like, okay, this is cool, and like we're prepping, but like we're gonna only sign up for one shift because it doesn't matter. And the first day we get there, we're setting everything up, and the restaurant's supposed to open at 11, and there's like 3 people waiting out at 10:30. Like, are you guys open? Like, can we order something? And they're like, okay, like we can start making stuff now. And like as they start making stuff, there's like a line that builds up, and one of my students like nudges the other student, and she's like, hey, like, look at all these people, like, we're success. And I'm like, this is like what it's about. It's like not necessarily about the tech, it's about like how you do stuff and how it leads to other stuff, and then how you just like, ooh, this is cool, like, I want to keep doing more stuff so that I can do more stuff.
That is awesome. Absolutely awesome. Melanie, thanks so much for coming on and for what you're doing to help inspire children and to help lead the next generation of technologists and promote open source, promote open hardware, and using a creative approach to education. We really appreciate it. We'll get you back on the program soon.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been awesome.